From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo. This is From the South. Dozens of Brazilians have gathered in the Esplanade of Ministers to see President-elect Jair Bolsonaro rehearse his inauguration. Bolsonaro will take the oath at the Alvorada Palace. At least 12 heads of government are expected to attend, among them the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, as well as the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has declined to attend. The ceremony is expected to be followed by 250 to 500,000 people.
Sí, nós somos do Paraná.
We are from Paraná. We are here exclusively for the inauguration. We have worked a lot for our region, and we campaigned for Bolsonaro there. We had to come for the inauguration.
Bolsonaro was elected to be president, and for that we hope he accomplishes at least a part of what he promised.
And just hours before the swearing-in of Jair Bolsonaro, supporters of Brazil's Workers' Party have held their own New Year's party. They gathered outside the police headquarters in Curitiba, where the former president Lula da Silva is in prison. As midnight struck, they chanted Happy New Year, Free Lula. Our correspondent Brian Meir brings us more.
A local judge denied Luis Inacio Lula da Silva his right to receive family visits over the New Year's holiday, but thousands of union and social movement activists traveled from across Brazil to wish a Happy New Year to the former president. They joined the activists, who have been camped out in front of the federal police headquarters in Curitiba, where Lula has been held in solitary confinement as a political prisoner since April 7th. By the time the sun set, after the traditional good night shout to Lula, there were thousands of people in the camp. There were musical and theater performances, and Lula's New Year's greeting to the Brazilian people was read to the crowd by PT President Senator Gleisi Hoffmann. We will not lower our heads and let them take away our happiness to be alive and fight for better days. Tomorrow will be another day, he said.
Our social movement has been here since the day Lula was arrested. We can't let him feel alone for 1 second. So we set up the camp the first day he arrived here. There were a lot of people here, and we rotate and people come. So the resistance in solidarity with President Lula is forever. We will only live here the day he gets out.
I came here to give solidarity to Comrade Lula, who is a political prisoner and an example of resistance for the Brazilian workers, and for building a better world. As long as he's held here, we will stay at his side, maintaining the resistance, maintaining our indignation, and maintaining our capacity to fight.
As midnight approached, the crowd assembled as close to the window of Lula's cell as they could get. The activists held flowers and turned their cell phone lights on and yelled Happy New Year's to Lula 13 times. Brian Meir, Telesur, Curitiba.
The Cuban Revolution, one of the most important events of the 20th century in Latin America, is marking its 60th anniversary. Those who experienced it will never forget the triumph march of those bearded revolutionaries who came down from the Sierra Maestra and for 7 days crossed the length of the island.
Jose Alberto Leon was 22 in January 1959. For his achievements as a fighter in the rebel army, he was chosen as part of Fidel Castro's security detail during the Freedom Caravan. What he experienced then, he can never forget. 60 years have passed, and the memory still takes his breath away.
I found myself at the side of Fidel. In the midst of all that attention, and thanks to that, people were showering on him, shouting for him, kissing him, throwing flowers, bringing their children. A whole multitude never heard before. I was very moved.
They say it was the biggest show of public enthusiasm in the history of Cuba. For a week, over more than 1,000 kilometers, people turned out to see their heroes pass by.
At this time of triumph, I recall the heroes who have fallen and give my deep, heartfelt thanks to the people of Cuba who are today an example and the pride of the Americas.
Witnesses say that the images that survive don't do justice to the scale of what happened. Everyone wanted to see him riding on a tank seized from the dictatorship. Nobody wanted to miss the chance of seeing the man who was already a legend. In town after town, Fidel spoke directly to the people in the direct language they understood.
Since the people are now in charge, we need a new style. We no longer come to speak to the people, but for the people to speak to us. From now on, it is the people who must speak, the people who must rule, the people who must make the laws.
They say that Fidel Castro's entry into Havana was like something nobody could have imagined. Bells tolled, car horns blew, boats sounded their sirens, shops and offices emptied everywhere. The crowds were waiting. It was a climax to end all climaxes. Fidel spoke to the people of Havana from the spot where the dictatorship stationed its best troops.
I believe that at this decisive moment of our history, the tyranny has been overthrown, the joy is unbounded, and yet there is still so much to be done. Let's not fool ourselves that now everything will be easy. Maybe now everything will be a lot more difficult.
Fidel called for peace and revolutionary unity. Soon there would be land reform, the literacy campaign with barracks turned into schools, and the nationalizations. It was the beginning of a new era. A new Cuba was being born.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has called for unity in a televised New Year's address. Putin highlighted problems in the economy, healthcare and technology sectors, as well as others, and stressed that a brighter future will only be possible through a collective effort. The address aired to Russia's Far East regions before midnight. And President Nicolás Maduro has thanked the Venezuelan people for their solidarity and commitment in the past year. In a New Year's message, he said 2018 had been a year where the country consolidated the population's social rights through the missions.
Finaliza el 2018.
2018 is ending, and it leaves us important lessons. Difficulty has made us all better and stronger. We have grown in values, in spirit, in convictions and experience. We see things in ourselves that we didn't see before. And these capacities that have emerged in the daily struggle, I know will help us to achieve much more in the immediate future. We have sown with courage and patience, and now it is time to harvest the fruits of prosperity. I have no doubt the people have not let me down, and I will never let you down.
Guyana's government is awaiting the House Speaker's ruling on Thursday on the no confidence motion filed by the opposition. The Attorney General says the government's position has always been that the motion, which was passed by one vote with support from a former government backbencher, was not valid. He contends that the opposition needed 34 instead of 33 votes for an absolute majority. The New Year is a universal celebration enjoyed by people all over the world. So let's take a look and to see how different cultures celebrate it.
After nearly 8 years of war, the streets of Damascus came to life with Syrians in their droves from all religious backgrounds enjoying the festivities. The markets were adorned with colorful decorations and lights as people soaked up the atmosphere. In addition to a traditional fireworks display, Syrian culture was fully on display as people danced to traditional music. In China, the Olympic Park was transformed into an extravagant spectacle complete with dancing, skating, and sculpting, where its native giant panda bear was present too. The show was also part of the opening ceremony of Beijing's Ice and Snow Cultural Tourism Festival to mark the hosting of the 2022 Winter Olympics. Artist Huang Jiang made the Olympic-themed sculpture, explains her vision behind the creation.
My sculpture is about the athletes dancing together and going towards a bright future. I wish the Winter Olympics will achieve a great success and everybody has a great new year.
And in Jakarta, Indonesia, hundreds of couples tied the knot in annual New Year's mass wedding. Around 900 couples got married in a ceremony funded by the government. People on low income or those who cannot provide official documents qualify for the event. Couples wore traditional Indonesian clothes and accessories for their big day.
More stories coming up. We'll be back. Welcome back. 2018 was a year of resilience and resistance on full display. Millions of women from all backgrounds and continents took to the streets as part of a global movement of empowerment and activism.
Together we're stronger! Together we're braver! Together we're braver!
A sisterhood of resistance. Everyday women laying the groundwork for extraordinary change. They're all inevitably linked. These catalysts for change took their fight for equality to the streets in perhaps the largest global display of women-led mobilization. The occasion was International Women's Day. On March 8th, defiant voices flooded capital cities across the world, calling for an end to gender-based violence and femicide. Free, safe and legal abortions was also a central demand. An estimated 2,000 women die in Latin America every year due to unsafe procedures. These startling realities have helped push activists, including those in Latin America and the Caribbean, to demand deeper social and political change.
It's a deep-rooted institutional problem. In the face of the government's failure to implement effective measures, we, women, are organizing ourselves since our various institutions have failed to put mechanisms in place.
The struggle for women's rights is a struggle for women to be allowed to be human as they choose and to be valued not because they meet particular ideals, but simply because they are.
There is a package of laws that today are not fulfilled in our country that are guaranteed by the Labor Code. For example, you have the law that permits breastfeeding in the workplace, and we know that today that is not even respected. There are not even daycare centers in any places of work that has more than 50 employees. They have to have them. Also, there is a 30% gender pay gap. Plus, the glass ceiling has not yet been shattered. Women do not have access to leadership positions that has cost us dearly.
Activists may have taken their struggles to the streets, but home, it turns out, is the most dangerous place for women. More than half of the 87,000 women killed last year around the world died at the hands of intimate partners or family members. Just imagine, that's equal to 137 women every single day killed by persons they actually knew. The findings of a 2017 UN Global Report spotlights the number of femicides by continent. Figures show Asia is where women ran the greatest risk of being killed. 20,000 lost their lives in the last year alone. Africa follows closely with 19,000 gender-based killings. 8,000 of these types of killings were recorded across both North and South America. In fact, in Latin America alone, just under 3,000 women were murdered by those closest to them. Europe followed next with 3,000 lives lost, and Oceania with 300. But these figures are likely far greater, as many cases go unreported. We must also remember those whose stories never reached the media. Meanwhile, the push for change continued. There was a groundswell of support as a reproductive rights movement galvanized in Argentina and later spread throughout Latin America. In June, the Argentinian Senate would vote on a bill to allow abortion up to 14 weeks of pregnancy, following narrow approval by the lower house. The proposal was passed by the lower house by a narrow margin after a 22-hour session. The bill would make Argentina the third Latin American country to broadly legalize abortion after Cuba and Uruguay. And just outside the Congress, under the veil of night, thousands of women erupted in celebration. But their happiness was short-lived. Almost 2 months later, on August 8th, the upper house said no to the law. But all was not lost. The debate brought to the fore a new political player, the women's movements, which grew out of the Ni Una Menos, Not One Less marches against gender violence that started in 2015 and continue to grow and strengthen.
It doesn't have anything to do with this government. It has to do with feminist organizations and how the topic was made popular in many public debates. It transcends even the political arena. That's because we have presence in all parties that agree with this legislation of abortion.
This has given the movement depth and a dimension. Even with all of the associated struggles, the law seeking to ensure legal, safe, and free abortion has only received the support of the lower house at this point. This also goes hand in hand with the bid to implement secular sex education in schools. The state must also provide contraceptives to the entire population. These three pillars are going to lead us to what we need. The abortion law is therefore necessary to reduce the number of unsafe abortions in Argentina.
Social organizations, women's movements, and feminist activists in general, we have fought so much for this historical moment. After decades of fighting, we have already won on the streets, and we have also won the social debate. And even at high schools, we have won, because our students have been the ones who have rallied for adults to discuss this. And there is, in part at least, the triumph.
Women have also fought hard for their space in the political arena. In the last Brazilian presidential elections, women led the Ele Não or Not Him movement against the far-right leader of the conservative Social Liberal Party, Jair Bolsonaro, who would eventually become president. On September 29th, activists launched a wave of nationwide protests from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro, and throughout several other cities, mass protests erupted in repudiation of Bolsonaro, a candidate known for disparaging women, blacks, and gays. It was only the beginning ahead of the final round of elections in October 28th.
Most people are here just to speak out on what they don't want. We don't want a macho Brazil. We don't want a homophobic Brazil. We don't want a country that rejects minorities. So it's a fight for our evolution. Because we don't want backtracking. We don't want dictatorships. We just want the right to freedom of expression. We don't want women to earn less than men. This is a struggle for women's rights, which are human rights.
As you can see in these protests, there are white, black, homosexual people. There are fathers and mothers. It's a very diverse group. And this type of candidate and this type of policy does not represent Brazilian culture.
As a black woman, I would never vote for a misogynistic man. I would never vote for a man who says a woman could be raped, because it's against every principle and right women have fought for historically.
Still, the campaign to end violence against women kept going.
Queremos ser libres, libres, no valientes.
Women across the globe continue to take a stand against gender-based violence. This as the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women was observed in November. On this day, the Dominican Republic was first to set to honor the three Maribel sisters who were murdered by the Trujillo dictatorship. And further afield in Ecuador, thousands flooded the city streets. Students, members of indigenous communities, and different women's organizations marched to raise awareness. People of all ages and from all backgrounds came together against domestic violence, sexual abuse, and harassment of women. And at the same time, in Syria's northeast, dozens of Kurdish women marched in solidarity with their sisters around the world. Women played an important role in freeing the region from the Islamic State group.
Many women in Africa continue to be victims of violence. What Turkey is doing is exactly what Daesh used to do. The murders still continue and they still face violence.
Transgender women, transgender people have an age limit. We ought to be dead for society by the age of 35.
I only have 13 years left, and I need this remaining time I have left to tell people stop murdering trans people. Today we are also here to thank those transgender people and sex workers who helped to decriminalize same-sex relationships in 1997 in Ecuador. Thanks to them, gay men and women can walk on the streets today a bit more freely.
In our work, women are often oppressed with phrases that diminish their ability. They are told they can't do certain tasks because they are women, or they are told they need to take care of their homes and therefore don't have time to work.
In 2018, through activism, women stood tall on the shoulders of those unsung heroes who fought before them. Together, they raised their voices for those who were not heard. In many countries, the state still controls women's bodies and reproductive choices, especially brown and black ones. No doubt, the movement for women's rights reached a crescendo in 2018, and this gave space for a broader debate. As 2019 approaches, surely the wave of feminism is far from over.
We're taking one last break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has said that he remains committed to denuclearization, but warned that he may have to seek an alternative route if the U.S. doesn't hold up its end of the deal.
I'm always ready to sit down again with the US president at any time and will make efforts to produce an outcome that the international community would welcome. However, if the US miscalculates our people's patience, forces something upon us, and pursues sanctions and pressure without keeping a promise it made in front of the world, we have no option but to explore a new path in order to protect our sovereignty and achieve peace on the Korean Peninsula.
South Korea welcomed Kim Jong-un's commitment to denuclearization and inter-Korean ties. The Unification Ministry said the South was working to make the advances in relations with the North irreversible.
The government will continue to advance reconciliation and cooperation between North and South Korea to the point that it cannot be dialed back, while at the same time working closely with the international community and doing the best to realize complete denuclearization and establish a solid peace regime on the Korean Peninsula.
Residents of Mosul in Iraq have celebrated the New Year for the second time since the liberation from the Islamic State group. The group seized the city in 2014 and banned festivities. Now, residents hope for a good year for all its religious communities as they gathered to see in 2019. 8 people have been injured after a car plowed into a crowd celebrating the New Year in Japan. The incident occurred just after midnight in a popular tourist area of Tokyo. Police have detained a suspect as investigations continue. And we leave you with more images of people welcoming in the new year. These ones are from Brazil. More than 2 million people turned out for the New Year party on Rio de Janeiro's Copacabana beach. Around 16 tons of colorful fireworks lit up the sky. Nearly 2,000 policemen were on the scene. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, we are on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. We are also on social media. Go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.